Thank you. Right. The name, as I was saying, the names of Hare Krishna Rama are names of God. And why do we chant these? Because through association with God, one becomes spiritually purified. And our understanding is, and one thing that's very special about these Sanskrit mantras, is that the name of God, of Krishna and Rama, is identical to God himself. So when one associates with that sound vibration of the Hare Krishna mantra, one is associating directly with Krishna. In most languages, the word and the thing itself are somewhat different. Language is a symbol system, right? If I call that a chair in English, I could call something else in Spanish or something else in Hindi or whatever the name was. The name has nothing specifically to do with that thing itself, with the object. There's a distinction. The Sanskrit language is unique in that the sound vibration has the same attributes as the thing itself. So that when we're chanting the names of Krishna and Rama, then they're actually present and they're empowered within that name, within that mantra. So it's a very powerful process where one comes in contact with God and one feels a sense of purification, one sense of developing a relationship with God and developing much more of our loving capacity. You also experience freedom from stress, a lessening of anxiety, a lessening of so many of the concerns that we have in this world. Because after all, the material world that we live in is a difficult place, and it's a dangerous place. There's danger at every step. Now, why is that? Someone saying, well, what's so bad about it? My life is good. The problem is every single living entity in this universe experiences four things: birth, death, disease, and old age. We can't get away from that. And I remember when I was young, probably the age of many of you, those things didn't mean so much to me. Even when I heard the philosophy, I said, yeah, that sounds good in theory, but what does it really mean? Now that I'm in my 60s, I have much more of a very real experience of old age, disease, and knowing that the body is only going to live so many years. Now, that's the common human condition that we find ourselves in. It's only a source of anxiety and stress and difficulty if we overly identify with the body. If I think I am this body and this mind and these senses and everything that is here, then the thought of loss of that, or the experience of loss, causes great distress. If we understand that we are not the body, but the spirit soul, the spirit, the consciousness that's within the body, then that's completely removed from that. The soul does not experience birth, death, disease, and old age. The soul does not experience anxiety, fear, pain. It's the body and the mind that experience these things. So that's the beginning of our philosophy. I'll give you a 5-minute rundown of the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. It's actually very, very extensive, so this is kind of the Reader's Digest version or the Cliff Notes version. First of all, as I said, we are all the pure spirit soul that is within the body. The body changes. We go through many different bodies. We have an understanding that the soul transmigrates from one body to another. So we may be in a human form of life. I may be an American man in this body, in this lifetime. In a future lifetime, I could be a woman, I could be an animal, I could be a plant, I could be anything. Because we understand that the life force is within all living entities. Plants, animals, humans all have that same life force, that same consciousness or soul is there, but the consciousness of plants and animals is obviously very covered. It's much more rudimentary. It's not as developed. The human form of life is unique, even though we are really the same nature. For instance, as far as the perspective of my spirit or my soul, I'm no different than the dog or the cow or the geranium. But the difference is, I have the ability for higher consciousness. I have the ability for higher intelligence being in the human form of life. So it's really a special opportunity that we have to be able to understand why we're in this world. The geranium and the dog are not asking questions about what is the nature of the universe. Why am I here? Why am I suffering? Why is there war? Why are there problems? Only human beings are really asking those questions. And so because we can ask those questions, we have the ability to seek out and to find the answers to those questions. Now, how do we do that? The problem is most people seek in the wrong places. We think our scientists are going to give us the answers, or our economic advisors are going to give us answers. We look for so many different people. When our life is threatened, we go to our doctor, or we go to a specialist, and we're sure that somehow or another they are going to give us the answer that's going to save me from that condition. Ultimately, they can only do so much. They may try, and they may do good things as far as helping people, but all of that can only give us so much relief from the ultimate suffering that's here in the material world. Now, does that mean that the whole picture is negative and gloomy and dismal, depressing? No, not at all. Our spiritual master once said that the devotee is materially pessimistic but spiritually very optimistic. Because we understand the spiritual nature of the self, that we are not part of this body and only the body is suffering, we can actually experience unlimited happiness in our spiritual consciousness. So that is what we are trying to do. We are trying to develop our spiritual consciousness so that we can get out of these suffering conditions of material life. As I said, we transmigrate from one body to the next, and that's based upon another term you probably heard, karma. Karma means, very simply, whatever action you perform, there will be a reaction for that in the future. It's almost like a law of physics or something. For every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So but it's a spiritual law. It basically, whatever we do, we will experience or we will get some reaction for that. So if I do good things in this life, good works, I act morally, ethically, religiously, then I will get a good opportunity and have a good body in my next lifetime. And obviously the opposite is true. So we may have a human body again, or we may go down again to animal and plant species of life. This is called the cycle of samsara, and this is what we want to stop. As devotees of God, we want to break the cycle of repeated birth and death in this material world. When one becomes self-realized or fully conscious of oneself and fully conscious of one's relationship with God, then one is able to completely transcend this material sphere, and at the end of one's life, one leaves the material world and returns to the spiritual world in the original relationship with God. So, the answer to what is the purpose of life? The answer to the purpose of life is simply to get out of this material world, establish our relationship of love with God, with Krishna, and return to our real home in the spiritual world. So that's what we're doing. That's kind of what the Hare Krishnas are about. In that process of self-realization or transcendental searching to be able to get out of the material world, to understand our spiritual relationship and to act in that spiritual relationship. Because our understanding is that each one of us has an original relationship with God. We've forgotten that for the most part now, but it's within us. So when we're chanting Hare Krishna, when we're performing acts of devotion, when we're acting as servants of God, we're invoking that dormant relationship that is there. We're reawakening it. So we're not trying to impose something artificial. It's not that, well, here you are, we don't want you to do what you're doing, we want you to do something very different and foreign. It's actually not different and foreign, it's actually natural. It's actually natural to who we really are. Because who we really are is the spirit soul who has a loving relationship with God. And through devotional service to God, through chanting God's name, we can revive and remember that relationship again. And once we do that, one experiences a different level of happiness and pleasure than you actually can receive from any type of material happiness. So we ask everybody to do that, to take that up, to take up chanting, and make your life happy. I'm not going to speak too long. We're going to chant a little bit at the end. We want to demonstrate that a little bit. We also have some books that are free for you to take up here if you're interested. But I wanted to make sure that I left time for questions because I'm not sure if I really covered the things you're interested in or there's other things that you'd like to know. And feel free to ask whatever you want. I mean, we get everything from deep philosophical questions to why do you wear those funny clothes? So, whatever you want to ask is fine. Yes?
I haven't heard you mention the word dharma. Is that a term that you use? And if it isn't, then end of question. If it is, what does that mean?
Yeah, the word dharma, there's many translations for it from the Sanskrit language, but dharma often means religion or duty or one's religious duties, like that. Since you asked, there's actually two levels of dharma. One is kind of our ordinary material dharma, like I could say, I happen to be, I'm a father, a husband, I'm a grandfather actually, so I have a certain dharma or duty to my dependents, to take care of them or whatever. I have a certain occupational dharma or duty. But beyond that, there's also what we call Sanatan Dharma. Sanatan Dharma means our eternal duty, or the real spiritual duty. And that spiritual duty, or Sanatan Dharma, is devotional service to God, to establish our relationship with God and perform acts of devotion. Is that okay, or?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yes, in back.
How important or unimportant these material things in this belief system? Is it like they're bad in and of themselves, or maybe we overuse them, or something of that nature? What is the...
That's a great question. I'm really glad you asked that. If everyone heard it, the question is, how do we view material things? Are they something that's automatically bad? Are they good? Does it depend on the utilization? Yes, it depends on the utilization. You're exactly right. We are in this material world. We're surrounded by material world. We call it the material energy. The material elements are all here. Our bodies are composed of material elements. So what do we do with them? One school of thought, in fact, there are philosophies, different, some of the Indian schools of thought say just yes, renounce it all. It's all illusion. We don't say that. We say it's the material energy, but it is also God's energy. It's also everything is coming from God. So certainly the material energy is also coming from God. But we have two choices. I can use those material things for myself, for my purposes, for my enjoyment, in a selfish way, or I can use those in a spiritual way. So what we try to do is utilize everything in God's service. So, as I said, I've got my pad here, and we're using a microphone, and I drove a car here to get here. So we're certainly using material things, but the idea is to use them in God's service. Then they also become spiritualized and not a source of entanglement in the material world, but become another source of our service to God. Okay?
Yeah, so basically you use the material things to help the spiritual journey.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. There's a Sanskrit term for it. It's called yukta vairagya, which you don't have to memorize. Vairagya means renunciation. Yukta means, it's come to the same word as yoga, as union. So it means we renounce by utilization, by using those things in God's service. Yes, sir.
You stressed the importance of the relationship between God and man, and that we should cultivate that relationship. Within Hare Krishna, what is the theology of the origin of man?
Great question. What is the origin of man in our theology? Basically, of course, God is the origin. God is the original personality, the original source of everything. He has different energies. He has his spiritual, internal energy. He has the material energy, which is everything we're seeing around us. And there's a third energy, which is called Tatashta Shakti, or Jiva Shakti, which means us, the living energy, the soul. So this is, we are part of God's energy. We are part and parcel of God. We are emanations from Him. We are in many ways of the same quality of God. Here's another Sanskrit term for it. It's Satchidananda. Sat means eternal. Chit means knowledge, and Ananda means blissful or happiness. So God is Satchidananda, and so are we. Our nature is to be eternal, have full knowledge, and to be blissful or happy. So what's the difference between God and us? It's a difference of quantity. In other words, we are very small and God is very great. We're not that much different from many of the Western religions, the Judeo-Christian theology, in terms of our understanding of a relationship with God. Our spiritual master gives an example from our scriptures that if you have an ocean, and I take a drop of water or a handful of water out of the ocean, and I check the salinity and the composition, the chemical composition of that water, the water I have in my palm of my hand is going to be the same as that entire ocean, right? But could I say I have the ocean in my hand? No. So in the same way, we have the same qualities of God, but in very small quantity. Where God is the whole, the totality, the origin of existence, we have some of the same qualities, but in smaller quantity. Yes. Yes.
Where is this most commonly practiced in the United States? Because I've never heard of it or anything, so.
Okay, where's it most, well, first of all, we're not doing our job if you've never heard of it, so that's a good reminder that we need to come out more, maybe. Invite us to more programs. We have centers in most of the major cities of the United States. Believe it or not, our largest community in North America is where I live in little old Alachua, Florida. We have about 1,100 members there. It's mostly families, people who live around the temple. Not so much a monastic center, but a very, very large community there. But we have large congregations, large communities in Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, really in most of the major cities. In Florida, we have a small center in Tallahassee, near the University of Florida State. And we also have a center in Gainesville, near the University of Florida. We have a center in Orlando, in Miami. Where else? Well, we have some centers in Tampa. We don't have a temple, but we have gatherings in places like Tampa, Jacksonville, like that, where the devotees come together in people's homes and like that. So we're around. If the closest place to you would probably be Tampa, and Uma here is from Tampa, and she'd be happy to let you know if you ever want to visit, or you can come. Yes?
So if you don't live like near a temple and you practice your religion, do you just have gatherings?
Yeah, that's fairly common. Sometimes if there's devotees that live in an area where there's not a temple, then once a week or twice a week, they may come together and chant together, read, things like that. And some people, even if they're by themselves with their family, they can worship in their home. Yeah.
And another thing, is there a reason for the small number of temples? Like, in some, I'm a Christian, so for church, we just, build churches. Like, a lot of people build churches and started. Is there a reason for your small number of temples?
Well, I'd say because the Christians got a real head start on us here. No, I mean, this is primarily a Christian country. Most, that's the predominant religion. So naturally, there's going to be more churches. And we started in the 1960s, and of course, we're building and growing. And I think, honestly speaking, there may be a little bit of a cultural difference or a cultural challenge for us because we're introducing something that's a little bit different, a little bit new. Although I think if people understand the theology, they would find it not really so foreign. But at the same time, we sometimes struggle with people understanding us or having misconceptions or, taking a look at the strange people or something, and it's there. But we're actually growing. Yeah.
The four principles that you said, like no sex, gambling,
Yeah.
station, is it like sex for pleasure, or like if you and your wife want to have a baby, is it like not allowed, or how does how do
Okay.
kids work?
Yeah, the restriction about illicit sex is not having sex outside of marriage. So and we believe that sex is primarily for the procreation of children.
So in your marriage.
So within marriage,
it's
sure,
okay,
yeah, sure.
But so sex for pleasure is okay. It's not like
Yeah,
banned.
yeah.
Oh.
No, we just are fairly strict about premarital sex and extramarital sex. Yeah. Yes?
So, you all can also plants, like, could you become a plant, or can someone become a plant after this life, or just an animal?
You could become a plant. That'd be a pretty good drop. You know, you'd have to get some special qualification for that one. But there's thousands and millions of different species of life forms, and one tends to go progressively upward to higher and higher forms. Another, they might become like a monkey or something. Then to a human form of life. The human form of life is unique because some people ask if we believe in evolution. Well, we believe in spiritual evolution. There's a spiritual evolution through the different species to the point that when it comes to the human form of life, at that point, you have choice. I was mentioning that humans are unique in the higher consciousness, but there's also another thing that's very important. We also have free will. We don't have unlimited free will. We're not God. God has unlimited free will. But we do have small free will. God actually gave us that free will. If we did not have free will, we would not be able to willingly choose to love God. God doesn't want to just have a bunch of robots around him, who have no choice. So it's a free choice. Because you have that free will, you can use that in a positive way, or you can use it in a negative way. So if the human being uses that free will and makes, we'd say now probably makes poor choices, does things which are, really unethical or hurt other people or like that, then one can go back into the lower forms of life. One can also advance through good works. One can advance to higher life forms. Yeah, go ahead.
I have two questions. One, should we feel like bound by our consciences then if we like smash a plant that could have potentially been a human? And also, is being a human the last step before going into the spiritual realm?
A human could be the last form for going to the spiritual realm. Doesn't necessarily mean that we will, though. That depends upon our activities and our spiritual Basically, the Bhagavad Gita says whatever state of consciousness you attain in this lifetime, in your next life, you will start at that point. So whatever your consciousness is now, if I die now, whatever consciousness I'm in, I'm going to take up at that point. So, where we go from here depends on whether we become free from the material world and we go to the spiritual world, or whether we go down into other species of life. There's even another higher human life, that we could take, more advanced, human life. What was the other part of the question?
And the other one was just like if a plant could potentially be a human, or like have been a human, or even an animal or something.
Well, that's an important point. It kind of also ties into one of the reasons we're vegetarian, although that doesn't answer the plant question. But because, animals do have a sense of pain, and they do have some, it's lower, but they do have some consciousness, we don't want to unnecessarily cause pain to any living entities, animals particularly. Obviously, we eat plants, you have to eat something. God has a system where every animal and plant has a quota. I mean, if a tiger eats meat, there's no harm in that because that's what it's supposed to do. That's how he's set up. Where we have a choice, we can choose what we do. I think the simple answer to your question is that we try to avoid harming any plants or animals as much as possible. But you can't do it 100%, obviously. We probably wouldn't even be able to live without harming plants in some way. I suppose you could just eat fruits that fall off the tree or something. But but practically speaking, that's. I guess what I'm saying is, if you have a choice, you certainly don't want to inflict any pain or suffering on any other life form, anything else in life. Yeah.
Do you cut your grass then?
I do cut my grass, yes. I don't know if it hurts it or not. I mean, it doesn't kill it. I try to keep it alive. I actually try to water and fertilize it and keep it alive. But the main prohibition that we have is as far as meat eating. Because animals obviously do have a higher consciousness. They certainly experience pain. They experience distress. Anyone who has a pet knows that, right? I mean, there is some level of consciousness that is certainly there in animals. Yeah.
In your opinion, being a professor of psychologist, which school of psychology would you think that Hare Krishna best aligns with?
Well, there is a Vedic psychology. Within the Vedas, there's actually a lot of discussion of the nature of the mind, the nature of intelligence, consciousness, things like that, which I guess are sort of part of psychology. What I found is particularly, I've been involved in counseling and therapy and things like that too. As a counselor, and I found that there are some very interesting different things that people are doing. Even, for instance, you've heard of mindfulness. It really comes more out of a Buddhist tradition rather than my tradition. But it's a similar idea. The idea is there of detachment. In other words, mindfulness means that you sort of watch yourself doing what you're doing. You watch yourself, how your emotions are overtaking you, how you're out of control, whatever it might be. I'm just simplifying it, but it's an idea of becoming somewhat detached. In other words, understanding that I'm not really, and not only am I not this body. Sometimes it's kind of easy to understand, but we're also not the mind, and so we also have to become a little detached from the mind. And I found, as far as in terms of therapy, if people understand that, it's actually very liberating. It's a fantastic thing for people to understand that I don't have to be bound by all these thoughts, by everything that's happening like this, because it's not really me. Not that we're not responsible for what we do, but it's not the self. So there's a few others that I've used that I think they're not the most common. Yes?
Thank you for this. I have two questions. How does the Hare Krishna movement view someone like Jesus? Do they take a stance on who he was?
Yeah, we do.
And secondly, what motivates the missionary activity of the Hare Krishna movement? Because, go ahead.
Two excellent questions. As far as Jesus, a technical term, Sanskrit term is called Shaktiveshavatar. What it means is, God incarnates or comes in different forms. In one form, he comes that's called Shaktiveshavatar, which means a personality who's empowered to work on behalf of God. So we consider Jesus in that way. We also consider Buddha to be an incarnation of Krishna. So we actually are quite liberal about other religions. We see that Jesus was a great devotee of God, and what did he preach? Love of God. Basically, right, that we should love our fellow man and love God, which is not very different from what we're saying. So we have great admiration, appreciation for Jesus, for Buddha, for other religious leaders like that, and great saints, sages that have been out throughout the ages. And your second question was?
Like for example, Christians do missionary activity just to save souls. What's motivating Hare Krishnas? Trying to
save souls.
Oh, right.
Well, there's a principle. It's a very high principle of understanding. It's called compassion, and we use the term in a vernacular way, but compassion means that one has empathy or understanding for the suffering of others. So, because our understanding is that practically everyone in this material world is suffering, because they're going to experience birth and death, if nothing else. So, it's out of that compassion that we have a sense, a religious duty, to try to give spiritual life to others. That's basically it. Now, even if my own personal conviction and sense of compassion is not fully developed, which I wouldn't say that it was, I know that my the great self-realized souls and the saints and sages, like my spiritual master, had that. They experienced, that's why my spiritual master basically was 70 years old. He took a steamship. He finally got a free ride on a steamship down in the hold or something to America. He had $7 in his pocket and didn't really know anybody. He landed in Boston Harbor, and everybody told him he was a fool. He was crazy. Why would he possibly do this? It was only because he had this missionary desire to be, to bring Krishna consciousness, spiritual life, bhakti yoga to the rest of the world. And it's out of that. And so, of course, his example inspired us. So the example of my guru inspired me to also take this up and also to try to do what little I can to also help. Yes?
Is there like some sort of a hell in this movement or this religion, or is there no connotation?
Well, that's an interesting question because, we would say, going back into some life forms is a hell. Be born a worm is kind of a hell, and there are other planetary systems. Sometimes we have this very egocentric idea that we're on Earth and we're the only people in the entire universe, and there couldn't be any other life form of all the millions and billions of planets that are out there, of course, right, except us. That's not even very logical, is it? And every science fiction writer will say, oh, of course there's other life forms, but that's just science fiction. And the fact of the matter is that there are other planetary systems, there are other planets where there are other life forms, other human beings, and some of those conditions are very bad and some of them are very good. Some of them are heavenly and some are more hellish, we could say. So we don't really have quite the same conception of a hell that you're damned to and that you go to eternally or something like that. But we do say that if one leads a very bad life or does harmful things to others, then in their next life they may be in a situation of suffering. And that could be due to a particular planet that they might be born in, or it could be a particular life form that they're in. But they have the opportunity to come back up. They will continue evolving back to the human form of life to get another opportunity. So we do not believe in eternal damnation. In the back? Yeah.
I was gonna ask, so if you do good all your life, and then at the end you do something bad, are you damned? Or if you do bad all your life, and you do good at the end?
Well, it's the totality. It's the whole package. Yeah, it's the good and the bad, whatever the balance sheet is, I guess, for you. However, we do say that in terms of getting out of the spiritual world, which depends upon remembering God or chanting God's name at the time of death, that if one does that, we have different scriptural stories about that one can become elevated immediately if one does surrender or recognizes God, chants God's name at the time of death. So that's very beneficial. Sir?
I'm wondering, in the light of everything you've said, how is evil in the world?
The easiest way for me to describe that is say that evil is basically ignorance. There are certainly evil acts, there's evil behaviors. We don't really think so much that there's like an evil force like the devil or something which is a counterbanting force. It's competing with God, so to speak. But there certainly is. We see things. I was just reading in the paper. It's like somebody else is going into a school and killing people and yes, there are acts that are evil. But we don't say that there's necessarily an evil force or that, but due to ignorance, due to not understanding our relationship with God, not understanding God's will, God's desire, God's laws, God's principles, people will perform evil acts. We had a few more here. I think you're next.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay, is there a point in time where you stop migrating into different life forms or you go into spiritual one? What do you do? What do you say?
Yeah, do you just hang out there?
What happens if you get out of the material world and go to the spiritual world? Oh, you have a great time. It's real nice.
So
No,
in a sense,
the thing is, our understanding, a little facetious, our understanding is that, the spiritual world is actually a place of love, it's a place of activity, it's a place of relationship. Anything that's in the material world must be there, except in its pure form, in the spiritual world. It's kind of like we have relationships, we have love, right? We experience all these things. You think God doesn't? Where did it come from? anything that we see in this material world must have its origin in the spiritual. Otherwise, God wouldn't be all-powerful and wouldn't be the creator of everything. However, so therefore, in its pure form, we experience activity, we experience pleasure, we experience variety of relationships, we experience loving relationships with God at the center in the spiritual world.
So, I think you might answer. So when you stop, like, because you said, like, good acts, like, you might go, like, evolve upward, and, like, if you do
Yeah.
bad acts, you could go lower. Like, when
Yeah.
does that cycle stop, and you're in that spiritual realm?
Yeah, it stops when we fully surrender to God, basically. In other words, everything's based upon desire. When we give up the desire to enjoy the material energy and the material senses, everything separately from God, and our desire becomes purified to where our desire is to love and to serve God, then we get out of the material world, go to the spiritual world. Yeah. It takes some time. It's not like it's something, oh yeah, I'll just decide tomorrow. It's a process, it's a practice. And that's why we perform a spiritual practice of regular chanting, meditation, reading, of devotion. It takes time to develop that. I saw a couple others. Okay, let's get, and then back to you. Okay, go ahead in the middle.
About the issue of evil, how would you explain, if you find that it comes from like ignorance of what's good, how would you explain, say, like mental illness? If somebody's compulsed to do something that you would call evil, but it's beyond their control.
Yeah, mental illness is it's another type of karmic reaction. When we talk about, karma, and then we experience different suffering in this world, some of that takes the form of mental suffering. And I'm a psychologist, so I can tell you that people suffer more mentally than they do physically, in my opinion. Mental illness can cause tremendous suffering and pain, and we certainly want to try to help those people and do everything we can. But we do understand that it is a particular karmic reaction, just like anything that I've suffered in this lifetime.
Couldn't you say that they're being doomed by karma to keep repeating?
Not necessarily doomed. I mean, I know people who have come to our movement and who have begun chanting and begin the process of spiritual life, and frankly, I'd say they were a little bit mentally ill. So they're not doomed. I mean, anybody can take up spiritual life. Okay, probably one more, and I think we're. Does everybody leave at 4? Is that okay?
Around that.
Okay, yeah.
I was just wondering what your theology is on eschatology.
On what?
On eschatology, end times, last times. Is there a last time, end times, or what is your theology on that?
We have a cyclical view of universal events rather than a linear, if that makes sense. In other words, the universe goes through different cycles continually, eternally. In other words, it goes through times of creation, times of maintenance, times of destruction, but it's a cyclical type of thing, and it's not just and then everything ends.
Are you going to chant?
Yes, we are. Why don't we go ahead and do that since we only have a few minutes?